Everyone knows the Sherman. But why do so many historians still argue that the M26 Pershing was the tank that should have arrived much sooner? In this video, you'll discover why its production was delayed, what really happened when it finally faced the Tiger and Panther, and whether it was America's greatest tank or one of its biggest military mistakes. Stay until the end, because the real story behind the Pershing is far more surprising than most people realize. Some vehicles achieve legendary status through sheer production numbers, while others carve out their reputations through a few decisive, high-profile victories. The M26 Pershing, however, occupies a unique space between these two extremes. If you're interested in tanks, secret military projects, and forgotten war machines, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are many more fascinating stories ahead. Enjoy the video, and let's continue. It never became the ubiquitous symbol of World War II like the Sherman, nor did it see enough combat to fundamentally alter the campaign's trajectory. Yet, decades later, the debate over its legacy has not only persisted, but continues to intensify. Some argue that the Pershing was America's first truly modern tank, finally capable of standing toe-to-toe with the finest German armor. Others dismiss it as an expensive, late-arriving project that emerged only when the war's outcome was already inevitable. The deeper one delves into its history, the more difficult it becomes to reach a simple conclusion. On the surface, the story seems straightforward. The vehicle arrived in Europe only during the final months of the war in limited numbers, leaving the vast majority of American armored units to soldier on with their familiar Shermans. It might seem that the discussion could end there. However, it is precisely this narrative that makes the Pershing's history so compelling. To understand why the Pershing sparks so much debate, one must look not only at the timing of its arrival, but also at its technical significance. For its time, it was an entirely different class of vehicle. Its combat weight reached approximately 46 tons, nearly 16 tons more than the mass of earlier Sherman modifications. This increase in mass allowed engineers to significantly strengthen armor and mount a much more powerful weapon, though it simultaneously posed entirely new requirements for the engine, transmission, and running gear. The Pershing's main argument was its new gun. Instead of the widely used 75mm American gun, or the later 76mm variant, the tank received a long-barreled 90mm M3 gun. The barrel length was over 50 calibers, ensuring a significantly higher muzzle velocity for armor-piercing shells. The ammunition load included armor-piercing, high-explosive, and sub-caliber rounds, allowing the crew to confidently combat both heavy armored vehicles and fortified firing points. At the same time, about 70 rounds were stowed inside the tank, with the ammunition rack distributed in such a way as to maximize the efficient use of the limited internal space of the fighting compartment. Protection changed just as significantly. The front of the hull received armor over 100mm thick, with rational angles of inclination. Such a scheme significantly increased the effective thickness and increased the probability of a ricochet. The turret had a massive cast structure with a powerful gun mantlet capable of withstanding hits from most common German anti-tank weapons at medium ranges. At the same time, the designers deliberately made a compromise. The sides remained noticeably thinner than the frontal projection, as an excessive increase in thickness around the entire perimeter would have made the vehicle too heavy even for American industry. But it was this feature that would later play an important role in combat episodes, which we will talk about later. Many famous clashes between the Pershing and German tanks depended not only on the power of its gun, but also on the angle at which the opponents met each other. Sometimes, just a few degrees of hull rotation decided the outcome of the entire duel. Even the appearance of the Pershing indicated that the American school of tank building was changing rapidly. The low silhouette of the turret, wide tracks to reduce ground pressure, torsion bar suspension instead of earlier solutions, and increased internal turret volume for a 5-man crew, all this was a step toward a completely new generation of armored vehicles. The machine was already being created not as a means of infantry support, but as a universal tank capable of solving a wide range of tasks directly on the battlefield. And yet, the main question remains open. If the Pershing really had such serious advantages, why didn't the American army get it much earlier? Why did the United States continue to rely on the Sherman for almost the entire war, knowing full well that on the European front it was increasingly having to deal with much more powerful opponents? The answer lies not only in technology or the capabilities of the industry. The reason was much deeper, in the military doctrine itself, which determined the development of American tank troops from the very first days of the war. It was it that determined the fate of the Pershing for many years before the first serial tank came off the assembly line. To understand why the M26 Pershing remained only a promising project for so long, it is necessary to return to the beginning of the Second World War. It was then that the American command made a decision that would subsequently cause many disputes. Unlike Germany or the Soviet Union, the United States for a long time did not consider the tank the main means of fighting other tanks. This task was officially assigned to special anti-tank units armed with towed guns and self-propelled tank destroyers. The logic seemed quite convincing. Tank units should quickly break through defenses, accompany infantry, develop the success of the offensive, and destroy light fortifications. And if heavy enemy machines appeared on the way, specialized formations would deal with them. That is why the requirements for new American tanks remained relatively conservative for a long time. Reliability, high mobility, and the ability to quickly produce thousands of machines were in the first place. Already then, the industry demonstrated incredible rates of equipment output, and the army did not want to disrupt this rhythm with complex experiments. As a result, the main combat vehicle became the Sherman, a tank that ideally matched this concept. But the more the war unfolded, the more often reality began to contradict the calculations of the headquarters. In practice, tank units were constantly encountering German armored vehicles without any support from specialized anti-tank units. The battlefield was changing too quickly. While the tank destroyers took up positions, the situation had already managed to change. Sherman crews had to enter into battle on their own with machines they were not originally intended to fight. By this moment, American engineers already understood the limits of the existing design's capabilities. The Sherman's layout had practically exhausted its modernization reserve. The diameter of the turret ring was about 175 centimeters, which seriously limited the installation of larger weapons. Attempts to place a heavy gun led to overloading the turret, poor balancing, and reduced reliability of the guidance mechanisms. Even a more powerful 76mm gun required reworking the interior space and a new turret. No fewer problems arose with protection. The initial thickness of the Sherman's frontal armor was about 50mm. Later, it was increased to about 63mm, at a rational angle of the sheets. However, further reinforcement of the hull quickly led to an increase in mass, and the power plant was already operating almost at the limit of its capabilities. Most serial machines were equipped with gasoline engines with a capacity of about 450 to 500 horsepower. For a tank weighing about 30 tons, this was enough, but any serious increase in weight immediately reduced the specific power, worsened acceleration, cross-country ability, and the life of the transmission. Even the running gear gradually approached the limit of permissible loads. The VVSS-type suspension with vertical coil springs had proven itself well for its simplicity. However, with the increased mass of the tank, the ride smoothness deteriorated, the load on the road wheels increased, and firing at high speed became less accurate. Later, the HVSS suspension with horizontal springs and wider tracks appeared, but it was also an attempt to maximize the life of a design created for completely different requirements. The American Army still believed that modernizing the existing machine would be enough. It was this decision that delayed the appearance of a completely new tank for several years. However, soon events on the European front would show that the old theory was beginning to collapse rapidly. A real turning point occurred not at the drawing tables, but directly on the battlefield. The Allied landing in Normandy was the moment when American crews began to regularly meet with German heavy tanks under conditions where it was no longer possible to rely only on numerical superiority or air support. Each new battle showed more clearly the enemy had changed, but American armored vehicles had not. Meetings with the Panther proved particularly painful. Formerly, this tank belonged to the medium class, but in terms of armament and protection, it significantly surpassed most Allied vehicles. Its long-barreled 75mm gun with a barrel length of 70 calibers accelerated the armor-piercing projectile to a very high initial velocity, allowing it to confidently hit the Sherman at distances where American crews were often not yet able to effectively respond. The Tiger remained an equally serious threat. Its famous 88mm gun possessed high accuracy and power, and its massive frontal armor allowed it to withstand hits from most American shells from long distances. To get a chance of success, Sherman crews had to close for distance, look for bypass routes, attack from the flanks, or coordinate the actions of several tanks at once. This required great skill and did not always end successfully. Frontline reports became increasingly alarming. Commanders noted that American units had to win the battle not due to the superiority of equipment, but thanks to their numbers, crew interaction, and competent tactics. More and more often, the same thought was voiced. The Army needs a new tank that can enter into an equal fight without constantly looking for tactical advantages. It was then that promising projects, which were previously considered without much haste, received a completely different priority. The designers already had experience working on the T-20 series experimental machines, where new gearboxes, various suspension variants, and several types of weapons were tested. These prototypes tested a hydromechanical transmission, torsion bar suspension, an increased turret ring, and the possibility of installing a significantly more powerful gun without critically worsening the working conditions of the crew. At the same time, the requirements for the new machine were being revised. The future tank was to receive a more spacious fighting compartment capable of accommodating large-caliber weapons, a reinforced cast turret that could withstand significantly greater loads, a new turret rotation system with an electric drive, and more effective observation devices for the commander and gunner. Increasing mass was no longer considered a major drawback if it ensured an increase in combat effectiveness. But the transition to the new concept proved to be significantly more difficult than expected. Any increase in mass automatically required strengthening the transmission, changing the design of the drive wheels, reworking the suspension elements, new load calculations on the engine, and even reviewing the requirements for transporting tanks by rail and across pontoon crossings. Creating a new machine ceased to be a simple replacement for an old tank. In fact, the American industry had to build an entirely different class of armored vehicle. It was at this moment that the history of the Pershing ceased to be just another engineering project. Now, it was an answer to problems that could no longer be ignored, and every new delay meant that crews on the front line would have to enter battle on machines whose capabilities were gradually reaching their limit for some time to come. Work on the new machine did not start with the M26 Pershing. It was preceded by a whole chain of prototypes on which American engineers literally learned to build heavy combat vehicles anew. Each subsequent prototype corrected the shortcomings of the previous one, but at the same time discovered new problems. That is why the path from the first drawings to the serial tank took significantly more time